you get into the role and then immediately your shoulders go up because you're like, oh my God, I don't want anybody to know that they made a bad decision in choosing me. And so I realized I was being particularly quiet in some of the group leadership meetings. And one in particular, we were in the boardroom, we were discussing, a change. My former leader was sitting beside me. There was lots of discussions in the room, and all during the meeting, I would kind of lean over and I would whisper something to her, and she'd look at me and nod. And a decision got made, and then we discussed next steps and marching orders. And when the meeting was over, I remember saying to her, "Well, I wish that had gone a different direction, but I understand why we're doing what we need to do." And she said, "You had some really good points. Too bad nobody heard them." And that was a moment when I realized that I had to, first of all, understanding I had a perspective, right? I have experience and, my upbringing and things that gave me a certain perspective. And what I had to do was make sure that every time I came into a meeting like that, I had to find the courage to share it.
Hey everybody, this is Caller ID. We're calling about your identity, your direction, and what you're doing with your life. I'm Brandon Davis Wells. Let's dig into what we're really doing here.
Come into Caller ID. Hey, look, this is week 2 of a conversation I had with Linda Rutherford, former CAO of Southwest Airlines, a fantastic guest and a fantastic person. If you missed last week, you got to go check it out. This week will stand on its own if you missed last week, and that's perfectly fine. But I will tell you, you'll want to check out last week. Also, if you haven't subscribed, if you haven't shared this with your friends, I would encourage you to do this. We're around episode 20, 21 here and trying to gain some traction. I really could use your guys' help out there. So if you would share this with people, maybe your family in a text thread, share it with your work group, share it with folks that you think might be interested in it. And if you're interested in being a guest, hey, I'd love to have you on here. If you have some interesting things to say about identity, calling, career, all of those fantastic topics that we talk about every week on Caller ID.
And then I have a wonderful mentor who used to be a chief communications officer and is now in teaching at the College of Charleston by the name of Tom Martin. And I've had several conversations about, career pivots and whether or not should consider a different opportunity. And he always turned back and said, "Lynn, I want you to think about where you work right now." He said, "In my view, you're in one of the top 5 places to do communications on the entire planet."
Wow.
He said, "Is the place you're considering to go right now 1, 2, 3, or 4?" And I had to be honest with myself and say,
Great question.
Yeah. No. And so, that would often, sort of solve that in my head for me. But no, great help, obviously, to have a mentor like that to really challenge my thinking. But those are the 2 reasons why I ultimately stayed and chose to build and then finish out my, leadership career at Southwest.
So obviously you value mentors, mentee relationships, and that's something that you've leaned into a little bit here as well lately. Tell me about the Betsy Plank Award and what that was about, and some of the mentoring and even maybe the approach you took, because I think everybody says they want a mentor, but not everybody knows what that means or what that relationship should look like. Or did you go to folks in your organization that were under you and say, like, was there a direct conversation where you said, "I'd like to mentor you"?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I'm a product of a single parent family. So my parents were divorced when I was 9 and my sister was 5. And my mom had never really worked outside the home. And so she had to go to work for the first time ever. So we were the quintessential latchkey kids with the house key around your neck on a piece of yarn. And I had to learn, I think, to be resourceful and resilient at a very young age. Had to learn how to contribute to making sure the house, worked. We all had chores, we had chores, we helped with dinner. My mom's first job was as a receptionist at an acoustics manufacturing company. And I think she made $4.68 an hour. And so, we lived in Section 8 government subsidized housing. So, we always had what we needed. We didn't necessarily always have what we wanted. And so college was not a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
And so through lots of scholarship help and federal Pell Grant, I got to have a college education, which was by no means guaranteed.
Right.
That I think built in me a lifelong commitment to pay it forward, because other people provided that funding that made it possible for me to have a game changing education. And so I have always agreed that if I had fun, time, talent, and treasure is what I call it. If I
Yes, I
had time,
love
talent,
that
and treasure,
phrase. Yes.
I'm going to use it to help others. And so the time I can do in mentoring, the talent that I can provide in teaching, and then treasure if I have things. I have an endowed scholarship at my alma mater,
Hmm.
Texas Tech, and I very much believe in giving back. And so for me, the mentoring is the opportunity to pour into others and help them see their potential, like many people did for me, including getting my college.
I used to use the phrase time, talent, and treasure when I worked in development with board. And I constantly would say, look, I know not all of you have the same level of resources or the same skills or the same whatever it is. And I always ask them to at least give one of them. If you have time, donate the skill. If you have time, come and volunteer, come and serve. If you have a talent, we can find a way to utilize you. And if you have the treasure, then great. If you have all three and you have the like, that heart for that is important. And I appreciate that story. I appreciate the vulnerability of sharing. It's not easy for people to walk through those things, but it is also out of our greatest challenges that we actually can serve in the best way. At least I've always found that to be true.
And I had one of the scholarships that I received was from the Dallas Rotary Club. And one of the benefactors of creating that scholarship was a gentleman by the name of Maurice. Maurice Akers was former,
Hmm.
he was the husband of Ebby Halliday,
Hmm.
who is known, as a very successful. And he would call my apartment in Lubbock, Texas, and check up on me.
Oh, wow.
Once or twice a month. And this is all before texting and cell phones and the internet and all of that. So we had an appointed time
Wow.
that we would talk, and I better be home to answer the phone. And I felt accountable, right? There was
Yeah.
somebody who was looking after me, who wanted to make sure I was studying and attending class. I just felt like his investment in me was important, and I didn't want to let him down. And so, that's college experience where I just felt like someone was, in addition to my mom, was looking after me, and
Yeah.
it meant a lot. And so I didn't want to disappoint.
Southwest has a pretty good reputation and track record with women in leadership. When you were there, did you feel a bigger responsibility as a woman, for those coming beneath you, that like, was that a heavier burden, or did you relish that? Was that part of the mentoring? Yeah.
Thankfully, it's a workplace that encourages growth and development, and for everyone. It can be a bit unusual to see with in the airline business, but we were fortunate that Barrett, as our president and then our president emeritus. I mean, she was one of the first presidents of an airline, and
Yeah.
so she set a great example. Now she'll tell you that was never I never set out to be an example or a trailblazer, but she was. And I think her comfort with her role at her level gave encouragement and enthusiasm, honestly, and then there were other, there was a head of marketing who was a female, my boss, who was then the head of communications, a female. There was a leader in ground operations in an operational role, which was pretty unusual. So we had lots of female mentors to look to. And I knew then that I wanted to also be one, right? I wanted to sort of that to being a woman example for others to follow. And, we have employee groups, one specific for women, another one for working moms. And I think that, I've been actively involved in those as a speaker, as a panelist, as a cheerleader. And I very much believe in the work that happens there in order to encourage women to see their potential. I do think that at times, as we may mute ourselves, or we may question our capabilities. And I think organizations like this, and like the women's support group, help us understand how to find our and find productive ways to share it in the workplace so that we can take on leadership roles like the one I had like the ones that I had the opportunity to serve in.
In any of those roles, that kind of leads me to my next question. Did you ever have bouts of imposter syndrome? Because I think most of us deal with it at some point where you're like, I can't believe I'm in this room, or I can't believe I'm doing this. Did that
Yeah.
ever happen? Did you ever feel that? And if so, like, how did you?
I learned a really big lesson. You get into the role and then immediately your shoulders go up because you're like, oh my God, I don't want anybody to know that they made a bad decision in choosing me. And so I realized I was being particularly quiet in some of the group leadership meetings. And one in particular, we were in the boardroom, we were discussing, a change. My former leader was sitting beside me. There was lots of discussions in the room, and all during the meeting, I would kind of lean over and I would whisper something to her, and she'd look at me and nod. And a decision got made, and then we discussed next steps and marching orders. And when the meeting was over, I remember saying to her, "Well, I wish that had gone a different direction, but I understand why we're doing what we need to do." And she said, "You had some really good points. Too bad nobody heard them." And that was a moment when I realized that I had to, first of all, understanding I had a perspective, right? I had experience and, my upbringing and things that gave me a certain perspective. And what I had to do was make sure that every time I came into a meeting like that, I had to find the courage to share it. So yeah, sure. Do you get into a role and be like, oh gosh, I hope, do I have imposter syndrome? Sure. There's lots to learn. In every role I've ever had, there were things to learn. And so thankfully, I have a self-assuredness that doesn't make me afraid to admit what I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I've done that through many roles that I've had at Southwest Airlines. And I think that vulnerability has actually helped me be approachable by team members. I think it's a bit self-deprecating. I think that I was hopefully less intimidating to some people. A commitment to always finding the answers if I didn't have them. And then what I realized through that lesson in the boardroom that day was that I had to sort of step through some of that anxiety I had about speaking up and being wrong to find my voice and then share my perspectives and opinions, of course, in a culturally appropriate way.
Right.
And I would do that. But I think those were, some of the lessons that I've learned along the way.
I feel like as we're talking, I'm thinking, man, it would have been really enjoyable to work for you. You seem like you would have enjoyed your work and not taken it too seriously, but you were also in a place that allowed you to be you.
Culturally, definitely, I ended up in a place that allowed me to be me. I think that, our CEO right now, Bob Jordan, always said to me that he felt like it was unfair when women who were assertive or used their voice,
Yeah.
were called aggressive,
Yeah.
or a word that began with a B.
Yeah. Other labels. Yeah. It's so.
Yeah, and he felt like that was completely inappropriate, and actually encouraged us to make sure that our voice was heard in the room and was taken into consideration. So I very much appreciate that. I wanted to be sure that the opportunities for those who would come after me would be, I think sometimes in some organizations, women get to a role and they felt like they had to fight for it so hard to get sharp elbows.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that culturally was not something that we practiced at Southwest. In some other organizations, they climb the ladder and then they pull the ladder up after them. I wanted to make sure that not only was the ladder there, but that we were holding it to make sure that when others were climbing up it, it was something that they felt like they could do. And I think one of the other lessons that I learned is my personality and my strengths are in what's called futuristic and arranger. So I like to do that horizon scanning.
Yeah.
I like the art of the possible. And I can sort of see that picture.
Is that the Clifton Strengths? Is that what those are? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So my first two are futuristic arranger. And I think that style of leadership was exciting for the people that I got to work with because, again, the compelling vision, the art of the possible, people get excited about that kind of work. And so I do think it made for a work environment where people kind of came in and felt like they could get their hands dirty. It was okay to fail fast, make a mistake, learn from it, move on. And I really, we did a lot of things that were where we were able to introduce programs, concepts, opportunities to the airline that I'm very proud of.
When you were hiring people underneath you for your team, did you twofold question? Did you guys use stuff like the Clifton Strength Finders to try to fill out your team? And what were the things, like one or two things that you really looked for that were not tangible things?
Southwest Airlines is a strengths-based organization. Not from the very beginning of my hiring were we necessarily looking at strengths, but certainly in the latter part of my career, we were using, the Clifton Strengths Finders as an assessment tool. A couple things that I would look for is an intellectual curiosity.
Hmm.
I can read your resume and see if you're, competent. In the interview process, I'm really looking for Southwest fit. I'm looking for an intellectual curiosity, and I'm looking for what I would call a teamwork orientation. So not somebody who wants to come in and be a star grabber, but somebody who comfortably can find their place within a team, because Southwest as an organization is kind of built on collaboration and teamwork. And again, nothing wrong with people who like to be strong, heads down individual contributors. Just to say that in an environment like Southwest, I think those people would have been a little more frustrated by that, with how much we sort of move as a group.
Yeah.
People sometimes joke we move as that, that scrum in a fourth grade soccer team.
Yeah, I love that.
But we do like to move together. And so people who are highly collaborative and enjoy finding their place on a team are often those who I think are most successful in our cultural environment.
I love the Strength Finder. I love Clifton. I like the Enneagram. I Myers-Briggs. They all can bring something. Lencioni's 6, I forget what they are now.
Functions of the team.
yes. All those things can be such helpful tools for knowing, number one, who you are, what your team is like, what gaps you have. I took that test for the Clifton Strengths, and for me, it came back as woo. Woo was number one, and I worked for somebody who was like, "Oh man, I can't stand woos." But he also said, but I will give him credit. He also said, "But I need those people around me." So he did recognize like that was like his absence, his not weaknesses, but it ranked lower on his strengths. We'll say it that way. I got time for a couple more. First of all, if anybody out there wants any more reflections from the podcast, I do a weekly Substack as well. Stuff we always don't necessarily get into on the podcast, but sort of my reflections on the week and on the interview. You can find that link in the show notes, and I'd really appreciate it. You can rate the show, follow it, do all those things that help it grow. And we're visiting with Linda Rutherford and talking all things career and identity. And I will ask you a leadership question. What is something that people misunderstand maybe about what it's like to be in senior leadership?
I think sometimes, particularly in Western culture, there's an expectation that leaders are know-it-alls. I mean, you must know everything, and that's how you got to your leadership position, and that's not the case. And so I think that's something that people misunderstand, is that if I'm an expert in my field, I should be able to be a leader in my field. And I would say that those are two different things. You can be an expert in your field, but the universal capabilities of a leader are the ability to motivate and inspire others. So to me, what's the difference between a good leader and a great one? A great leader understands what they don't know, and they're okay with it, and that they have the ability to motivate and inspire others. And not everybody has that natural capability, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
But that means that just because you are an expert communicator or an expert finance analyst or, an expert operator, doesn't mean you necessarily should ascend to be the leader of others if you don't naturally possess the ability to motivate and inspire others.
What I learned in seminary is a phrase that'll preach. And I think that, like what you just said, is if I could bottle that up and share it with every leadership discussion that we have in this country, I would, because it is so important. When I think about from a sports standpoint, as somebody who's coached a lot, I coached against some folks I coached against some people that knew X's and O's way better than me, or they knew baseball better, or at least it was in the ballpark, right? But the motivational part and understanding how people tick and what makes them tick and how to treat them is the differentiator. You're right, between good leadership and great leadership. John Wooden said, You don't handle people. You handle farm animals. You deal with people. And I will never forget that. And I think you're right. All right. This is a question I love to ask people. What brings out when you're at work or in a work setting your inner Larry David, the thing that, like, Curb Your Enthusiasm, it makes you the most frustrated. You're like, I can't believe this happens. And when you work for an airline for a long time, maybe you saw it, some ridiculous expectations probably from customers. You didn't say that, I did, because I was one of those people at one point. And then what about your Ted Lasso moments where it's you're at the center of Ikigai, you're at the center of what brings you joy and the world's need.
My grumpy Larry David comes out when people have a misunderstanding of what communication is. So it's like, when people assume communication will solve a business problem, that's when my grumpy Larry David comes out, because, communication didn't cause the problem.
Right.
So communication probably can't fix the problem. And that's when I get grumpy. My Ted Lasso comes out when I am working usually one-on-one with a leader, and some spark or light comes on when they realize that they want to do something, they achieved something that they didn't think was possible. But because I was there to encourage, challenge, stretch them, whatever that looked like, they got there and a light bulb went off. And that's when, the whole believe idea. And I was like, see, you can do it. Now, what else can we do? And I think that's probably when my Ted Lasso comes out.
If I could show you my desk that's in front of me that I have all kinds of things on top of, it is a believe banner right now. So I appreciate that. All right, we got time for a little bit more word association. You ready?
Sure.
Career.
Fulfilling.
Success.
Resourcefulness.
Failure.
It's okay.
I love that. Money.
Helpful.
Calling.
Calling. Let's see.
It's one that I think we all struggle with, because sometimes people think you have, like, I'm called to be a teacher, or I'm called to be a business person, or I'm called to do this.
I think I realize now in all these years that I think the calling where I am most fulfilled, this is not a one word answer,
That's
is
okay.
that impact that I have found that I can have on others. And I didn't know that I could do that, first of all, and I didn't know what impact that would have on others, and that's been truly fulfilling.
When you look ahead, what kind of work are you hoping to do going forward? I know you're working on a book. Are there more to come? What are you up to next, and what do you hope to do work wise and career wise here?
I think this next chapter does involve a little bit more paying it forward. And so maybe not necessarily, all as I think about, monetarily, but it is definitely using my experience and my work history as a way to pay it forward, where it is helpful to others who are pursuing a career in communications or with the airline business or aspiring to leadership.
Mm.
And I think that those opportunities to go into the classroom and teach, to do, corporate workshops, maybe where they're trying to align a leadership team. Those are the opportunities that I see that will be fulfilling and fun for me in this next chapter.
What do you do for fun? That's one question I always ask people, or I try to always ask people, because the first question most people say at a dinner party is, "So what do you do for a living?" And I hate that question. I try not to ask it. But it's kind of the nature of our conversation.
Yeah.
What do you do for fun?
Three things. My husband and I are both foodies, so we love trying out new restaurants. Second, we have a 4-year-old Tibetan Spaniel, so it's about spoiling our dog child. And the third one I mentioned early on, but it's working that way through that travel list that there was always a desire to travel, and ironic that I worked for an airline, but there wasn't necessarily time to do that. Now I have time. And so we are definitely working our way down our travel aspiration list.
Southwest has been big in the news lately, and big because of their change. the change in seating. I was talking with some friends and my dad about this the other day. I think they've done a fantastic job of communicating the message, at least on ads. What's been the response from folks?
We operated one way for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So I think you have to expect that when you make a complete operational transformation, there will be some people who are cranky about that.
Yeah.
Because, we are creatures of habit. And so, I think the news cycle passed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I think if you look in social, there's still a little bit of grumbling around, this. I will tell you, I've traveled at least a dozen times since the seating changes in January, and watching people sitting in the gate area, in the boarding, and then getting on the airplane. It's been really smooth. And so I am so proud of our employees. First of all, the employees behind the scenes who built the operational capability, that's remarkable.
I believe
and then watching our operators actually deliver on that promise, and those changes every day have done great. Our customers, for the most part, have come right along with us. And this is probably the largest transformation that the company has ever been through. And it's, 53 plus years of existence. You're going to have a few things you're learning and iterating along the way, but the technology works. The employees were well trained and ready for the change, and all the communication was hopefully to set our customers up for success. So I've been really proud watching from the sidelines everything that both our customers have learned along the way and what the operation has executed.
Well, I appreciate you answering that. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that. It just dawned on me of like, yeah, that's a thing that's going on. All right, last word. I'll give you the last word. What sort of wisdom or advice do you have for somebody out there looking at, their career and what's something that stands out to you that you can share with them?
I was just on a college campus last week and was asked that question. And I would say that what we have to remember, I think sometimes we struggle with decisions because they feel final. And what I tried to tell some of the folks I was talking with is that, a decision is not a life sentence. And so sometimes we have to make the best decision with the information that we have in front of us. And if we get into that decision and go, ooh, I made a mistake, remembering that it's okay. We're going to make a lot of mistakes in our lifetime. It's what you do when you realize you've made that mistake. Do you wallow in it? Does it cause analysis paralysis? Or can we pick ourselves up? Can we be resourceful? Can we pivot? And so that's my advice when I'm talking to people, is to remember that, decisions can be undone, and that nothing you do has to have, a finality to it. Make the best decision you can. Don't keep it. Don't let the anxiety keep you from making that decision. But if it turns out not to be a good one, okay, what did I learn about that? And then let's pivot.
That's Linda Rutherford. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Caller ID podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe with all of your friends on all of your social media platforms. Thanks again. Signing off, Brandon Davis Wells.